weren't doing anything. We were just messing around.
Friday the 13th is one of those franchises that need no presentation. Its antagonist became a pop culture icon. It has a lot of movies, official video games, non-official video games, comic books, and an extensive series of novels? For some reason, I wonder who will read those things. When an IP becomes so massive, you expect its roots, its beginnings to be pretty good, right? Well, more or less. Actually, the Friday the 13th movies are quite bad. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they are garbage, but when you compare them to the competition at the time, it's really hard to believe this has gotten so big. So, why did that happen? The first movie came out in May of 1980 and it was directed by Sean Cunningham, the producer of Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left. The movie is clearly inspired by Halloween, one of John Carpenter's masterpieces. In fact, the movie was born from the idea of mixing Halloween with Psycho's plot twist. Yeah, this movie's a real mess. We will get to that. The film features a young Kevin Bacon, a lot of uninteresting characters that we don't care about, a bunch of sex, and obviously death. If this sounds to you like a generic slasher movie description, that's because it is. Actually, Friday the 13th was the movie that popularized this trend in the horror genre. A group of teenagers have sex until they have an axe in their faces. The movie thinks this is it, that what it takes to make a good horror movie are just tits and blood. I mean, why are you seeing this other than the tits and the blood? I don't know, man. Maybe I was expecting a good story. Let's take for example Halloween, the movie on which this is based on. Halloween is a movie about evil. The killer, Michael Myers, kills innocent random people. His design is great. Carpenter is telling us visually that this thing looks human, but deep down it is not. The movie itself refers to him as pure evil.
I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
He has no motivation for what he does. He just does it. The movie works as a countdown. From minute 1, we know that there is a murder on the loose, and because this is a horror movie, we know that he's going to kill people eventually. But the thing is, for most of the movie, not much happens. We see these girls on a normal day in their lives. They go to school. It turns out that it is Halloween and they plan how to spend the night. One of them is going out with her boyfriend. Another one is going to take care of some children. And during all this time, Michael was there, far away, watching them, waiting for the perfect time to attack. And sometimes, often enough, we cut back to Dr. Loomis, who is following Michael's trails and trying to avoid the massacre he knows is coming.
Well, did you get my beer? Cute, Bob, real cute.
That scene is just incredible. The movie tells us that no matter who you are, no matter if you live in a wealthy neighborhood, you are vulnerable. Laurie looks at the house across the street without knowing what's going on. She thinks her friends are having sex, but in reality, they have been dead for a long time. At the end, Laurie's on the street, running and screaming, but no one helps her. It's a truly hopeless image. Friday the 13th copies Halloween, but doesn't understand what is it that makes Halloween a good film in the first place. The introductions of both films are practically the same, where we witness the murders from the eyes of the killer. In Halloween, we see the murder, and then the camera pops out of the killer's head to show us who he is. Turns out it's a kid. It's quite shocking, and it's a nice mini twist that you don't see coming the first time. In Friday the 13th, we see how two people are killed, and then the movie breaks your screen.
What the fuck, man?
This also happens with character design. Like I said earlier, Michael Myers is great because he represents the depersonalization of the killer, how he stopped being human a long time ago. Jason is just a guy in a hockey mask who kills people. Oh, and speaking of which, this design, Jason Voorhees' iconic design, doesn't appear until the third film in the series. Seriously, during the first movie we don't see Jason at any moment, and the twist at the end is that the killer was actually Pamela Voorhees, Jason's mother. You know, that old lady who hasn't appeared in the film until this point. This could have worked. The killings are shot as if this were a detective film by Dario Argento, but those films are precisely, well, detective films. We want to find out who the killer is, and when we do, there's usually some sort of twist. Here, we are presented with all the things we need to understand the twist just before the twist happens. So, yeah, this movie's rubbish, but how did it become such a big hit? I'm really asking though, how? As I said before, if we compare Friday the 13th with its competition of the moment, it's hard to believe that this has been a huge success. Do you know what other horror movie was released the same month as Friday the 13th? The Shining. I'll say it again, The Shy-fucking-ing. Imagine being a fan of horror at that time. A movie is about to come out, it's called Friday the 13th, so you go see it, it's pretty bad, and you leave disappointed. But 2 weeks later, The fucking Shining comes out. Not just one of the best horror movies, but one of the best movies in general. And yet, the shitty movie you saw 2 weeks ago is the one that becomes a pop culture icon. And it's not only The Shining. 1980 was a great year for horror movies. It is the year of Cannibal Holocaust, The Changeling, Carpenter's The Fog, Inferno, Maniac, The Ninth Configuration, and De Palma's Dress to Kill. These are all movies loved by film fans, and that left a very important legacy. But the one who became an icon was this guy over here. I'm being a little unfair here. This image, the icon itself, didn't appear on screen until Friday the 13th Part 3, and this is a big deal. The great horror sagas began with a great first film, and then there are numerous sequels that vary in quality, squeezing the success of the first part. With Friday the 13th, this happens the other way around, with the first and second movies being really bad and the sequels varying in quality, with some very good and others really bad. Friday the 13th Part 2 is actually very similar to the first part. The good thing is that now the killer is Jason, and the movie has this scene that I personally love. But the design is still not good. Actually, this is the worst horror movie villain design I've ever seen. Oh, and trust me, I've seen shit. But let's move on. Let's jump into the sequels. Oh boy. Friday the 13th Part 3 is when things start to get good. I mean, it's not a great movie, but at least it's fun to watch. And it has one great killing. But the most important thing is that in this movie is when the Jason we all know shows up. It might not seem like a big deal, but this design is... it's pretty cool. In the previous movie, Jason seemed pretty silly and not threatening at all. And, well, in the first one the killer was an old lady. Here is a huge guy who can literally crush your face with his hands. This movie came out in 3D. So it has a lot of silly scenes with things flying onto the screen. It's really funny. Like I said, while this movie is a lot of fun to watch, it's not a great film by any means. It lacks a bit in the sense of cementing Jason as a horror icon. But the next installment will be a lot better. In my opinion, it's the first good movie of the series. This was supposed to be the last movie in the franchise, which didn't happen because they released 8 more of these suckers. The thing with this movie is that while it's still not amazing, it's far from bad. It's a solid movie with character development, which at this point feels like a revolution, and it has good comedy too.
Hey! Ted! Ted! Hey, Ted, where the hell's Sparks, bro?
This is not just the story of Jason killing a bunch of horny teenagers. I mean, there's a lot of it, but it's not just that. We have this guy, I forgot his name, yes, who's looking for Jason to avenge his sister's death, who I guess was one of the victims from the previous movies. I wonder which one of them she is. And we have Tommy, who during the movie looks like just a kid, but ends up being the character who kills Jason in a pretty gory scene. And with this ending, Tommy slaughtering Jason and losing his mind, I think we got it. We finally have a good movie in the series. Like I said, it's not the best, but it's still pretty solid. This is what I would have liked the first movie to be. It is not at the level of other horror sagas, but it is not a disaster. I mean, the first movies in the series were complete trash, the third was mediocre, and the fourth was good. So, I want to know how it continues. This is the quality curve of the Friday the 13th franchise at this point, and as you can see, everything seems to be going well. Everything indicates that the 5th installment in the saga is going to be a pretty good one. Doesn't it? Doesn't it? Friday the 13th Chapter 5 is a very strange movie to comment on in the context of this video. It's not as bad as the first and second movies. The script is much more complex than the ones of the third and fourth, but at the same time it ends up being a movie with many pacing problems and more boring than those two. It continues the story of Tommy, the protagonist of Part 4, in the right direction with respect to what was established in that movie. But somehow, the movie fucked it up anyway. And also, it is one of the films in which more people die. So, what the hell happened here? For you to understand this point, it is necessary for me to tell you the story of Friday the 13th Chapter 5, something that I was trying to avoid throughout this video because, as I said in the beginning, Friday the 13th not only lacks themes, but it almost has no story at all. Jason is just a super zombie who suffered a tragedy a long time ago and kills people unrelated to it. But Chapter 5 is very different. Chapter 4 ends with this shot of Tommy slaughtering Jason, and by how it is filmed, it hints us that this boy became a complete psychopath. Chapter 5 begins with Tommy watching how two guys dig Jason's grave, but he comes back to life and kills them. And when he's about to kill Tommy, we find out that it was all a dream and that many years have passed since the previous movie. Due to the trauma he suffered, Tommy is sent to various asylums, but none were able to help him at all. We see that Tommy is completely gone and that he's a very violent person. And we also see how one patient kills another because he went completely crazy. And technically, that's the whole movie, at least as far as the story goes. Every now and then, the movie cuts to another place, introduces a couple of characters, then they die, and then we go back to the madhouse. This is the
pacing
of the whole movie. A couple of scenes in the mental hospital, periods of 5 to 10 minutes introducing a character, that character dies, and we cut back to Tommy. This is a serious problem. Since these characters' introduction are so long and we know they're going to die, we start to care less and the movie starts to get boring. Also, the movie uses this gimmick too many times. Ultimately, it all leads to the confrontation between Jason and Tommy. And we've come to the first plot twist of the film. It turns out that the killer was actually the father of the boy who was killed at the beginning of the film, who as revenge started killing random people. So, like in the first movie, the killer wasn't Jason.
I guess he used the Jason thing to cover up with.
But then Tommy goes crazy and kills a girl, and it was all a dream. So, basically, at the end, Tommy becomes Jason's legacy. It's one of the few things in the movie that works because it serves as a parallel to the end of the previous film. But why the movie doesn't work? To clarify this point, I have to contextualize a bit. Since its premiere in 1980, Friday the 13th became what is known as an annualized saga. That is, there was a new installment per year. I talked about Halloween at the beginning of the video because it's the movie that Friday the 13th took the most elements from. But during the 80s, there was some kind of competition between these two franchises. Each film of the sagas seems like an answer to the other. The competition was to see who was a stronger villain, Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers, which caused Halloween to become a parody of itself with a lot of shitty sequels. But in 1984, a new competitor will appear. A new horror franchise that managed to be as iconic as the previous two, and that was made by one of the biggest names in the genre. A Nightmare on Elm Street comes out. When Freddy showed up, the Halloween saga took a step back. For the rest of not just the 80s, but 30 years after, there was this kind of fight going on. Freddy versus Jason. Nightmare on Elm Street was written and directed by Wes Craven, who had previously established himself as a master of horror with The Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes, and The Swamp Thing. This first movie was released the same year as Friday the 13th Chapter 4. Just when the series had its first glimpse of getting better, a horror masterpiece appeared. While Friday the 13th had stereotypes waiting to be killed instead of characters, Nightmare tried to subvert those stereotypes to give us characters that we care about. The protagonist, Nancy, is a clever girl who manages to defeat the villain using her intelligence. Rod comes off as the stereotype of the bad boy, but later we discover that he really has feelings and is terrified. Glenn seems like the stereotype of the jock who only thinks about sex, but he never tries to go overboard with Nancy and genuinely helps and listens to her until the end of the movie. Tina is the weakest character, but she dies at the beginning of the film and her death is the one that starts the plot. I mentioned earlier that one of the biggest problems of Friday the 13th is its lack of themes. It's just violence for its own sake. Nightmare, on the other hand, is a great metaphor. Freddy wants to kill the boys to get revenge on their parents. The boys pay for the broken dishes of something they knew absolutely nothing about. Freddy is basically presented as God.
This is God.
He is omnipresent. He can get into the dreams of several people at the same time. In addition, its design is inspired by the Hatman, a figure that many people with sleep paralysis attest to having seen during this state. There's a sense of something mystic and out of this world. Nancy is treated as if she has a mental illness, but her parents worry to the point that they unwittingly end up making the situation worse. And just before the final confrontation, Nancy says her prayers, but not as if she's asking for the help of a divine being, but as if she's invoking the evil itself. And no matter what she does, no one can beat a god. After A Nightmare on Elm Street, a movie like Friday the 13th, which has hardly any plot, feels empty. So they try to put in a lot of story and things to try to reach a higher level. But the problem is that all that happens in the last 10 minutes. Imagine that you're watching this movie and not much happens. There are people dying, but it does not seem that there is going to be anything else besides that. And right at the end, the whole story happens at the same time. It is too much. It is so much at the same time that it undoes itself. If the story had been present throughout the hour and a half that the film lasts, there would be no problem. But when all that is only important at the end, it makes everything feel bad and rushed. I talk about Nightmare not only because it is seen as the competitor to Friday the 13th, but because, unlike the last one, it has a creator behind it. Wes Craven was not only the creator of Nightmare on Elm Street, but it was involved in most of the films, either as a producer or as a director. Friday the 13th was passed from hand to hand by different directors and writers, and I don't want to say that they just wanted to do their job quickly to get paid and go home, but that's what it feels like when you watch the movies. It is for this very reason that Friday the 13th is so inconsistent. The director of the first installment, Sean Cunningham, was a producer, not a director. I mean, he had directed things before, but it was not his field of expertise, so he copies Carpenter thinking it will work.
And Sean called me up and said, Halloween is making incredible money at the box office, let's rip it off. That is keeping it real.
In fact, Carpenter himself said that Friday the 13th movies just doesn't rise above its cheapness. Steve Miner directed Part 2 and Part 3. And you know what? Those were his first two movies. Yes, Steve Miner had never directed anything before these two. Then he will direct several films and, in fact, he was the director of Halloween 7, one of the good sequels of that saga. Who will guess it? Chapter 4 was directed by Joseph Zito, who had previously directed The Prowler, which I didn't see. Some people say it's very good. And you can tell he's an experienced director. Chapter 5 was in charge of Danny Steinman, who made these beautiful films. Do you know them? Me neither. Sean Cunningham produced several films in the series. However, the character of Jason was not created by him, but by Victor Miller, who after the first film did not get involved in the franchise again. But everything was about to change. The franchise was about to find its way. We finally get to the good movies of Friday the 13th, and it only took them 6 years to figure out how to make the franchise good. Just 6 fucking years. This movie begins with Tommy, who is now another actor, making sure Jason is dead. He digs up his corpse and stabs him with a spear, and casually a lightning strikes the spear, reviving Jason in a Frankenstein style. This movie is amazing. Chapter 6 was in charge of Tom McLaughlin. I can't pronounce that name. How is it pronounced?
McLaughlin.
Okay, let's start again. Chapter 6 was in charge of
Tom McLaughlin,
who is known among other things for writing several chapters of the series Amazing Stories, created by Steven Spielberg. His approach to the franchise is excellent, because it basically turns it into a horror comedy. The guy knows that by this point, Jason had gotten so ridiculously strong that there was no other way to go on with the story if it wasn't in this direction. It is also the first film that confirms that Jason is a supernatural figure. In the other films they had hints, but it was not entirely clear. Here, Tommy's plan to kill Jason is to literally do a black magic ritual. Like, yeah, this is happening right now. I love the opening of this movie. It is a complete declaration of intent. It's like
Tom McLaughlin
it's telling you, you just came to see Jason doing amazing shit, and that's what you're going to get. The killings in this movie are just the peak of comedy. My favorite scene is this, which looked like it was straight out of an SNL sketch. Also, the death of this character is so over the top that I love it. The final fight against Jason is also a blast, because Tommy's plan is so stupid that it's amazing seeing it work. Finally, Jason is defeated once more. Or so we think. This film came out in 1986, which was the year of horror comedies. Apart from Friday the 13th, it was the year of Critters, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Chopping Mall. My god, do you remember Chopping Mall? Little Shop of Horrors, Night of the Creeps, Troll, and Maximum Overdrive. You remember that movie? Directed by Stephen King's drug addiction? Friday the 13th Chapter 6 fit perfectly in this context, and like its predecessors, it was a huge success. So, what could they do with the next one? Since Jason was completely grounded as a super zombie, it was time to make the most of that idea. We've come to my favorite movie of the franchise, and considered by many the best of all. Carrie vs. Jason, I mean, Chapter 7 puts Jason to fight against a girl with mental powers. This is pure genius. After how ridiculous the previous movie was, they could have done anything. And that they've chosen to have Jason fighting a girl with telekinesis, it is very impressive, you know, because not only is it not weird nor ridiculous, but it's a really good movie. Originally, this movie was going to be the famous Freddy vs. Jason, but they had a couple of problems. Basically, while the Friday the 13th franchise was a goldmine, it wasn't making much money as before. This is why Paramount Pictures, the owners of Friday the 13th, proposed to New Line Cinema, the owners of Nightmare on Elm Street, to make a crossover film with two characters fighting. At the end of the day, this alliance didn't take place, but they were still having the idea of putting Jason against someone on his level rather than just killing teenagers. So, in the tradition of Friday the 13th, they took inspiration from another much better horror movie. I am obviously talking about Brian De Palma's Carrie, even copying the same shots on some occasions. The film quickly introduces us to all the characters. They are all stereotypes, yeah, but each one has something that makes it stand out quickly, and even if you don't remember their name, at least you know who they are. Like, yeah, that guy with that thing. The lead character, Tina, has a childhood trauma. She basically killed her abusive father with her mental powers, inadvertently.
I saw my father get killed when I was a kid. It really messed up my head a lot.
Now she returns to the house where this happened together with her psychologist to face the trauma and try to leave it behind. Tina and her psychologist are the strongest characters in the movie. The truth is that everyone else is there to die, and we know it from minute one. The thing is that the psychologist, Dr. Cruz, is more than aware of Tina's powers and wants to study them in depth. So he takes her to her childhood home, not to try to help her psychologically with severe trauma, but to try to fully investigate Tina's powers outside of a mental institution, so he can do all the crazy tests he wants. And obviously the other protagonist of this story is Jason. Tina goes to the lake where her father died and tries to use her powers to revive him or something, but she ends up reviving Jason because, like, she aims at the wrong corpse. Jason's design in this movie is amazing. He's super threatening. I love the fact that his body has already started to rot and we can see the bones in his back. And the partially broken mask that reveals his jaw, it's an awesome idea and it's pretty terrifying. During the movie there are quite a few killings and there is one or another good thing among those, like this one when we see Jason thanks to a lightning. At a certain point, Jason runs into Tina and Dr. Cruz, and I love that the doctor uses Tina's mother as a human shield. It is not just a comic moment, but it speaks a lot about the character, how he always tries to take advantage of others, but in the end... And finally, we get to the fight between Jason and Tina. The final battle is the best thing about this movie, because we finally see Jason fighting a worthy opponent. And we have one of the best scenes of the entire franchise. And the fight continues with this Jason design. It is truly impressive. In the end, Tina revives her dead abusive father, who takes Jason back to the bottom of the lake, representing how now she overcame her trauma and uses it to her advantage. Are we having themes and metaphor in a Friday the 13th movie? Is this heaven? I'm dead? Well, although this film is, in my opinion, the best of the franchise, it is not safe from having several problems. The first is the need to put so many scenes with a group of teenagers. because all this screen time could have been used to further develop Tina's background. The second is that the big confrontation between Jason and Tina takes forever to happen. I mean, it's the best part of the movie and it only happens in the last 15 minutes. There are also quite a few editing problems. The scenes don't flow well with each other. It feels like someone suddenly changed the channel on the TV or something like that. But it's still a good movie, with the deepest characters in the series so far and the best final confrontation of the franchise. And the killings, while not as imaginative as in previous installments, are fine and some are quite funny. However, it seems the fans were not very happy with this movie. And I get why. Friday the 13th fans keep watching these movies because they want to see Jason killing people, and in terms of that, this movie isn't very spectacular. You can tell they saved everything for the final fight. Besides that, the movie was not a horror comedy like the previous parts, so in the next installment they will try to return to the roots without losing the comic touch that Chapter 6 gave to the franchise. Alright folks, it's time for Jason to take Manhattan. As much as I like Part 7, the movie didn't do well at the box office. Lord Buck Lincoln, who had played Tina, wrote a script that continued the story of this character, in which years later she faced Jason again. But as the film had been a failure, this script was not accepted by Paramount, who will hire Rob Hidden, an inexperienced director, to be in charge of the script and the direction of the next installment. Rob Hidden had two ideas for his film. The first was to set the action on a ship and give the film a claustrophobic feeling, with Jason killing the crew one by one in an, I don't know, alien style. His other idea was for the movie to take place in New York, saying that the biggest thing we could do with Jason is to get him out of that stupid lake where he's been hanging out. Man, I love this guy. The two ideas were approved by Paramount, so Rob Hayden decided to mix them into one movie. This movie is a disaster, but still better than the first one somehow. The first hour of the film is spent on a boat with students, and it's by far the most boring shit I've ever seen in my entire... The only characters that have charisma and are interesting are the first to die, and the protagonists are the blondest characters. Rini, the main character, had hallucinations of Jason as a child, which makes no sense. Besides, Jason was a deformed child, and here... Oh my god. Oh my... What the fuck is this? The makeup in this movie is the worst of all. For example, do you remember the design of Jason without a mask in the previous movie? You know, it's amazing, isn't it? It is amazing. Well, this is Jason's design in this movie. Oh my god. I'm not going to bother talking about the ship part because it's so boring and it doesn't really matter. After the first hour of the movie, Jason finally arrives in New York. And while the concept of Jason in New York killing people is good, the movie doesn't take advantage of it at all. For 20 minutes we are situated in alleys of New York, not in the city, and in fact this was not even filmed in New York, it was filmed in Vancouver. Finally, after an hour and 20 minutes of film, Jason is actually in New York. This part of the movie has some good comedic gags, like Jason's encounter with the punkies.
You a dead meat slime bag! Yo man, it's cool, man, it's cool.
Or this scene in the subway. If the film had focused on these scenes, it would have been the best of the saga by far. But no, in the end we have a final confrontation in the sewers where Jason turns into a child for some reason. I understand what Rob Hidden wanted to do with this. He said he wanted to explore Jason's character a little more. But nothing is explained, and all these hallucination scenes and the ending don't work out. It's a concept that will be better covered later in Freddy vs. Jason. We will get to that, folks, stay tuned. The fact that Jason is afraid of water makes sense because, you know, he drowned. But in this movie he literally swims from who knows where to fucking New York. I mean, he went swimming! So when at the end they put this shot of Jason turning into a child represented as being afraid, it just doesn't make any fucking sense. This movie had a lot of production problems. The action couldn't be completely focused on New York because the locations were like super expensive. This is why the scenes in the alleys are filmed in Vancouver, a city with cheaper locations. In fact, in many film scenes that are supposed to be in other countries or cities are filmed in Vancouver to save costs. I'm not going to delve into the subject because Tony Su already did it in his video talking about it like 5 years ago. The point is that not being able to shoot scenes in New York due to the cost, they had to limit almost the entire film to the ship, which, as I said before, it is the most boring part of the movie and of my fucking life. And even with the few scenes they filmed in New York, they had to spend an immense amount of money, which made Friday the 13th Part 8 the most expensive movie in the series so far. Speaking of which, the movie competed against Nightmare on Elm Street 5, Halloween 5 and Friday Night Part 2. So, this film was a complete failure, being simultaneously the most expensive film in the franchise and the one that raised the least money. With the failure of 2 consecutive Friday the 13th installments, Paramount decided to sell the rights of the franchise. And they sold them to New Line Cinema, the guys who were behind not just the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, but all these great movies. It will seem that the franchise had passed into good hands, but believe me, the worst is yet to come. Here's the thing, Paramount sold the rights to Jason Voorhees' character, not to the franchise itself. That is why this movie is not called Friday the 13th Part 9, but it is called Jason Goes to Hell, because New Line Cinema could use the character, but not the title, nor other characters in the franchise. In fact, the protagonist of this film was going to be Tommy, the main character of 3 installments of the saga, but they did not have the rights for him. In turn, the same creative team is preserved, with Sean Cunningham being involved in this project as well. Cunningham still had the idea of putting Jason to fight Freddy, and now that New Line Cinema had the rights to both characters, it was more than possible. New Line didn't tell him no, rather they told him to write a script that starts to bridge both universes first, so that when Freddy vs. Jason arrives, it doesn't feel like something out of nowhere. So Cunningham contacted Alan Marcus, who was in charge of the script and the direction of the film. This was Marcus' first movie. He was only 23 years old at the time. And yeah, this movie is disastrous. It's not worth wasting time talking about this abomination. All you need to know is that now Jason is a demon from the Necronomicon or something like that he can possess people, and in the end he definitely dies. But we have a small cameo from the claw of Freddy anticipating the next movie. Yeah, I really don't want to talk about this movie anymore, I'm not interested. I just want you to see the only good scene this movie has.
I got a gun. Fuck that. I got a gun.
The point is that the movie was a monumental failure and neither Jason nor Friday the 13th will appear on the big screen again until 8 years later with Jason X. Jason X sorry, I can't say it without laughing, man. Oh my god. Jason X was directed by Jim Isaac, a monster-making specialist who had worked on Return of the Jedi, Gremlins, Arachnophobia, and The Fly. He had directed a film in the late 80s that fared disastrously, and after that he never directed again. Until 1999 when Cunningham contacted him to make, you know, Jason X. Freddy vs. Jason had been in production for many years at this point, so Cunningham had the idea of releasing another movie in the series so that people wouldn't lose interest in the franchise. Todd Fulmer wrote the script for Jason X, which is basically Friday the 13th but in space, you know, like that's the speech he used. And as usual for this series, it was the first script that Fulmer ever wrote in his life. This movie is a bizarre beauty. It's a super entertaining and comical movie, which is like the right approach at this point. I mean, a movie with Jason killing people on a space station could not be taken seriously. There aren't many remarkable things about the movie beyond the comedy. I mean, Jason fights a robot dominatrix in this one. We are open-mouthed in the deepest shit of all. The film was the franchise's third major failure after Part 8 and 9, but it did its job. People still had the franchise in mind, and 2 years after the release of whatever this shit is, Freddy vs. Jason will finally arrive. Freddy vs. Jason was released in 2003 and was quite a hit, being the highest grossing film of both franchises. It was directed by Ronnie Yu, a Chinese director who had made several action films and who had entered the North American market when he made one of the many Chucky films. This movie is one of the best of both sagas. The script is excellent. Things are happening all the time, and thanks to the over-the-top performances and incredible action scenes, the film is very fast-paced. Seeing these two characters sharing screen and beating the shit out of each other is very satisfying. They take great advantage of everything we know about Jason so far. For example, I explained earlier that in Part 8, Jason becomes a child and it is kind of silly. Here they solved that problem, with Freddy realizing that Jason is afraid of water and taking advantage of this to win the fight. The movie did so well that fans were asking for a sequel to it, which luckily never came. And I say luckily because I think this is the perfect ending for both characters, and that if this story had been continued, it would have been a complete trash. And we already have enough trash in this franchise. However, the ideas were there. They wanted to make a movie with Pinhead from the Hellraiser series joining the fight, which would have been completely stupid. There was also the idea of connecting the two franchises with Evil Dead, something that had been hinted in Part 9 with the appearance of the Necronomicon. While this idea was never made to the big screen, there is a comic book that explores this connection, which I plan to talk about later in another video, so for now let's leave it at that. Yes, it does exist. The idea of Freddy vs. Jason 2, or whatever it was called, was left behind. A New Line will try to get a little more money out of the characters by rebooting both Friday the 13th in 2009 and A Nightmare on Elm Street in 2010. But the characters will never meet again. And since we're talking about this, Friday the 13th is the 12th installment of the franchise, which, as I said, is a reboot of it. It's not good, I mean, it's definitely better than the first part of 1980, but, you know, this is still trash. But, well, now that we have gone through all the films in the franchise, the time has come. The moment to answer the question that I was asking throughout the video. How is it that Friday the 13th, being a franchise of films of very variable quality, managed to become what it is today? How did Jason become one of the greatest horror icons in history? The answer is, well, it's complicated. The answer to why Jason became an icon of horror is really complex. We could say it was pure luck. A very cheap movie made a lot of money in an unexpected way, which led the production company to release sequels, which also paid a lot of money because many people had seen the previous installments, and although they were not really interested in the characters, they wanted to go to the movies a while and have fun. The success of the franchise is due to a lucky strike, because by mere chance, many people went to the cinema to see it. Although the numbers of tickets sold was huge and that was a stroke of luck, the film had great marketing. It was in charge of, you guessed it, Sean Cunningham. Cunningham saw that Halloween was being a success, called Victor Miller to write a script for him, and literally said, "Let's copy Halloween, I know I can sell this." Advertising posters for the film were already hanging on the street before the script was written. Cunningham had produced The Last House on the Left, which, as I said before, it's a great movie. So he decided to hang on to its fame to sell better Friday the 13th. Of those who brought you The Last House on the Left come the scariest movie of all time, Friday the 13th. Cunningham already had horror fans waiting, but he was basically selling smoke, because the movie hadn't been shot yet, and it didn't even have a written story. All they had was the title, Friday the 13th. It is for this very reason that the story that the franchise tells us has nothing to do with the superstition that surrounds a Friday the 13th. One can assume that the plot takes place on Friday the 13th because, I mean, it is the title of the movie.
His next brainchild, with a considerable debt owed to John Carpenter's 1978 screen shocker, Halloween, would launch a whole new subgenre of horror.
And I had thought of this title some time ago called Friday the 13th. And I said to myself, if I had a film called Friday the 13th, I could sell that.
And Sean called me up and said, Halloween is making incredible money at the box office, let's rip it off. That is keeping it real.
Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take out an ad in Variety and put at the top, "From the people who brought you Last House on the Left comes the most terrifying film ever made. Friday the 13th. And that's all we had. We really didn't know what we were going to make. We just wanted to see if anybody would be interested in buying.
This clip is horrible and shows Cunningham as a greedy, heartless person, which he surely is. But it also shows us that Cunningham is not only a great salesman, he's one of the best salesmen ever. Just with this black poster with white letters, he can sell millions of movie tickets. Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Pinhead, all these horror icons had a creator behind them. People really passionate about the project, about telling their story. Then they were successful and became millionaire franchises that will release films just for the money, but their origins were honest. Carpenter directed Halloween and was never again involved in any other films of the franchise because he considered them abominations.
It's not about money, it's not about anything, it's about let's make a great movie.
Clive Barker was not comfortable with the Hellraiser sequels and ended up being the victim of a legal scam in which the copyright of his own work was taken away from him.
Professional imaginer, I think, is what I would like if I had to have a business card. I've done so many different kinds of things, but the common thread has always been the imagination.
However, Friday the 13th was born as a product, not as an author's work. Jason is basically a son of capitalism, a toy that different directors have fun with for a while to make a lot of money and then pass it on to someone else. But on the other hand, Jason is a horror icon because they made him one. The production company or Cunningham may not have created this character with love, but certainly the people actually involved in the movies did. There are dozens of documentaries that you can see about the franchise, but the ones that I find best are the ones that focus on the visual, on the makeup team, character design, visual effects. You can see that these people were delighted to be working there. You can see the passion they felt for the project. And for the most part, they were the reason why Jason became an icon. Sean Cunningham may take home all the glory for being the director of the first installment, but the ones we should be truly proud of are the people we don't see. Joe Hoffman, Jacqueline Johnson, Rob Wilson King, Tom Savini, and tons of other people who usually don't even appear in the film credits. These people in charge of Jason's design were, like the franchise, gradually improving. They are the ones that made the most out of their craft, out of sheer passion and love, despite knowing it will probably end up being tied up into a questionable movie. This endless list of people put a lot of love into what they were doing, on the level of Clive Barker with Hellraiser or Wes Craven with Nightmare. Jason wasn't an icon until he put on the mask in the third movie, so everything that followed was thanks to this moment. There's a big discussion about who came up with the idea to put the hockey mask on Jason, about who should get the credit, but at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. It was something collective. Jason is a character who was born as a product, but who grew a lot thanks to not just one person, but many people who contributed to his legend over the years. Thanks for watching.